Politics.
Welcome back to Funky Politics, powered by the Kudzukian Network. I am DC, your host, and I always tell everybody, I gotta always remind you, we keep it real, we keep it right, and we sure enough keep it funky up in here. Sometimes it gets a little too funky. Right now, it's pretty funky in our country. There is no doubt about it. We've got a president who has fomented dissension. There's a lot of terms you could use with what he does, but it's powerful. My grandmother used to always say, son, watch what you say, because the words that comes out of your mouth, they can't be taken back. And I think what our president has done over the years that he's been in office, and even prior to getting in office, is some of those words he's said have gotten to some of his supporters, and some of his supporters have taken these things actually to the extreme. They don't want to admit it right now, but one of their supporters committed a despicable act about a little bit under a week ago, and it was shown to the world, and the world has judged the person who's done this, and they judged him rightly, and hopefully the courts will see the same as well. But one thing about it, you cannot mouth out of your mouth one time and say, hey, look, turn the apple cart over. This ain't right. They're always against those of us who are conservative and so forth. That's not true. And then on the other hand, you tell the U.S. attorney to make sure that you do everything you can to get to the bottom of this. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. Mr. President, you can't have it both ways. It's either you're going to be right and you're going to be neutral and you're going to do what's right for the country and all the people that's in this country, or you're going to just hopefully move along here sometime in November. And we'll see what happens. I think at some point we're going to get this thing right. But what it has spurred is it has spurred some protests around the country, not only in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, but also in Memphis, Tennessee, as well as Los Angeles and some other places. People have gotten to the point, they say, that you cannot, and you shall not target Black men or Black women or Black children or Black families, and there's no consequence to it. So the way we do it is we take it to the streets and say, look, world, this is what America's doing, just like in the 60s, just like what they did in the 50s, the 40s, and the 30s, like they've done all of these years. You cannot continue to oppress a people, and I think that's what you're going to see a lot more of. You're going to see a lot more protests come out there. But speaking of protests and what's getting things that are right, Rodney Strong's on the program today, and Rodney, of course, has been with us a few times, and Rodney is an attorney, but most of all, he's a principal at Griffin Strong out of Atlanta, Georgia, where they're filled with attorneys and they're public policy consultants, and he does a lot of great work around our country. And we're going to talk to Rodney about a lot of these things that are happening in our country, not only the unemployment situation, evictions that are going to be coming up here pretty soon, and also this COVID-19 and what it has done to the economic stability of our country, but especially our small businesses in neighborhoods that look just like me and you. So, hey, let me go ahead, no further ado, let me get on Rodney Strong.
Politics is what we do. We just make it funky.
R&R on Sports.
1968 Olympian Dr. John Carlos.
Oh, man, it's an honor. They need to pick up their radio and tune you guys in.
There you go.
It's R&R on Sports.
Brother Strong, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. It's good to see you, DC.
Man, it's good to be seen is what I'm told, because it's a lot worse being viewed. That's
Yes,
what
sir.
Hey, man, let's get right into this thing, because it's not funny, but we got a lot going on. Not only are we fighting COVID-19, but we're also fighting the powers that be in our country. And there's a lot of people that don't want to see the African-American experience become something that's positive for generations to come. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the COVID-19 has added an additional weight on our shoulders. And I think especially people who have been in under-resourced communities, Rodney. Atlanta is one, Memphis is one, Chicago is one, Jackson, Mississippi is one. A lot of our cities that have these large urban cores, COVID-19 has given us literally pneumonia when it's given some other people just a sniffle.
No question about it. It's been said that the African-American community is the canary in the coal mine. And that's really what this pandemic has demonstrated. We're frontline workers. We are working in these hospitals. We're working as law enforcement officers. We're working as EMTs. And so we're on the front line of this in a lot of ways. And of course, a lot of the work that people tend to devalue, it turns out is the most essential work of all. And, people that are stocking the shelves in the grocery stores, the people that are, maintaining sanitation, the people that are doing the things that a lot of people don't want to do. And we tend to be disproportionately represented in those jobs. Dr. King said, all work has dignity.
That's right.
But we don't reward all work as if we recognize that it has dignity and that it is essential for the society to move forward. And so this pandemic exposes that.
I take one of those areas, and I think I'm looking at the nursing homes. There was this, one of the largest outbreaks of the COVID virus happened in nursing homes, but you had to have these medical assistants, these certified nursing assistants. They still had to show up every day. You don't have a ward full of nurses and a ward full of doctors. You have a ward full of CNAs and MAs that are taking care of our parents and our loved ones on an everyday basis. But a lot of them, as you say, Rodney, they're the ones who are not earning that. They're not earning large salaries.
That's right.
And I think when this COVID thing is over, I think we need to go back and reevaluate who should be making the dollars in our society. And I think you have to look at those folks in that healthcare industry who are on the front lines every day.
No question about it. I mean, these people are essential, but they're under-resourced and they're underpaid and they're not protected. And one of the things we've also seen, unfortunately, the posture that this administration has taken has made things worse. There hasn't been a rational response to this in terms of isolating people, tracking the disease, and in particular, providing the kind of personal protective equipment that people need. That just hasn't been done. And a big thing that they haven't done as well is they haven't really enforced the Occupational Safety and Health Administration guidelines. And so we see outbreaks in meatpacking plants across the country. And the president says, you're going to have to go back to work. They're essential. You can't close them down. We got to keep our food supply. But they're not having OSHA go in and actually set up these workplaces so that people don't spread the virus through those communities. And we're going to see a wave of infections across the Midwest and the South in places where we have meatpacking plants. You already have seen outbreaks in almost every major community where there's people working in tight circumstances, such as warehouses and meatpacking plants.
But how do you juxtapose it? How do you say, look, we've got to get an economy that can support the infrastructure that we have in our country, but then you got, let's just say, a meatpacking place, or you got a supply chain warehouse that's got to move goods and services to people, but then you have these outbreaks. So OSHA should step in, TOSHA should step in, or in Georgia's stamp, I'm sure it's GOSHA, GOSHA. Right. They should step in, but then you got the politicos, so to speak, that says, yes, we need to, but we don't need to shut anybody down.
Right. I mean, this is the type of public policy and public administration that we're observing from this administration that's, quite frankly, unconscionable. But there's a theme that runs through it. The people who work in these plants are people that are devalued by white supremacists, mostly Black and brown people who are not valued as legitimate human beings by people who hold the views that are espoused by people who support this president, and certainly espoused by the president. And so because these people are devalued, he's just basically saying, get back to work, and whether you live or die doesn't matter to me. Ooh. That's effectively what he's done when he said, these are essential industries. They must be open, but they're not going in and enforcing any kind of health and safety requirements on these companies. He takes a call from Tyson, and the next day he's saying that these meatpacking plants are essential industries. But hey, he cannot use his power to force companies to produce ventilators or personal protective equipment. Well, it's not about what he cannot do. It's about the fact that they don't value the people who are doing this work. And so if we're going to make a change, the change has to be that every individual is valued. Every individual has dignity. Every individual should be valued. Every life should count. And that's just not true. And we see it, of course, in the way this government has responded to the pandemic. Some lives are more important than other lives. And we see it in the way, obviously, that you alluded to in your opening, in the way Black and brown people are treated by law enforcement as well.
Well, I want to stay on those lines of the economic instability in our country and unemployment claims. Unemployment claims are right at a little bit north of 40 million. So if they're north of 40 million, that's unemployment claims. We're not even talking about, Rodney, the folks who just given up on looking. Prior to this, there were a certain number of folks who just given up on looking for employment, and those who are underemployed. How can you run an economy without strong public policy that says that when we have a CARES Act or we have a HEROES Act, that we have to look at not only injecting money into small businesses, but we have to put monies into people's pockets so they can spend. Look at what Canada did. Look at what I think it was Germany and what Italy did. They made sure that their citizens had dollars on a monthly basis through this COVID piece. But we have not done it. We thought a $1,200 deposit in your checking account or with a card of some kind of debit card or paper check was going to do. No one, even the Democrats or the Republicans, could have thought that was enough, Rodney.
Well, I think that at the beginning, there was an assumption that 2 months, 2.5 months was going to be enough to bring this pandemic under control. That was a possibility if you had had adequate testing and contact tracing, that you might have brought it under control. But they're opening it back up now without proper testing, without contact tracing, with the virus having spread all over the country. And clearly, the demand is not going to be there. If the demand is not there, then the economy is not going to come back.
Sure.
A lot of people who are in vulnerable categories, I'm vulnerable because of my age, of course. And I guarantee you, I will not be going a lot of places that I would have gone.
Sure.
I won't be spending the money that I would have spent. Typically, I, fly, 45 to 50 times a year. I had already flown, I think, 17 times at the time that the pandemic started at the beginning of March. Those dollars going to be going to Delta Airlines. That would have been going to Delta Airlines. Multiply that by, millions of people. And the same thing with restaurants. I mean, the governor of Georgia can say the restaurants are open all he wants, but you won't catch me sitting in a restaurant. And there are a lot of other people who are similarly will not be going out. And so they can't really restart the economy until they deal with the underlying public health crisis that we're facing.
But Rodney, some of these governments have opened up. Your governor, Governor Kemp in Georgia, was one of the very first that opened, and of course, my governor, Governor Lee of Tennessee, they were some of the first in the country to say, we're going to go ahead and start implementing a gradual reopening of our states. Luckily, though, you still have these local officials like Akeisha Lance Bottoms or Jim Strickland or Lee Harris or CEO Michael down in DeKalb County have said, no, that's a little too fast for us. We're still going to maintain our autonomy in this and protect our citizens. But now, so what is it looking like now in Atlanta, in your area? Are a lot of folks getting out? Are a lot of folks not getting out? What does it look like?
Well, I think that because this pandemic is one that has, the older you are, the more vulnerable you are. That I think that there are some young people, one of the things about being young is you feel invulnerable. You feel that you're invulnerable anyway. Yeah. And so the fact that the pandemic doesn't tend to hit, well, at least the COVID-19 doesn't tend to have as high a death toll among younger people, has made some of them more comfortable going out. And but the demand can't really be fully, can't really be fully replaced, because there are a number of people that aren't going to go out, no matter what the government says, because they recognize the danger, particularly people who have underlying conditions or people who are of a certain age. And so the point I'm making is that no matter what the government does, if they're able to open the government, everything back up 100%, there are going to be a lot of people who aren't going to go. And there are certain safety requirements that every entity has to engage in, which is going to reduce their revenue, even if people were willing to go, because you're not going to be able to put a restaurant at 100% capacity anymore. And so that has an impact. Restaurants operate because they turn tables a couple of times. Well, they'd have to turn tables 2 or 3 times to have one turn prior to the pandemic. And so the demand is not going to be there. And so the economy is going to come back as things open up and some people venture out. But generally, it's going to be a slow recovery because the underlying health issues haven't been dealt with. The public health crisis has not been dealt with. And until that's abated, I don't believe you'll see the economy come all the way back.
And speaking of the economy now coming all the way back, evictions. There was an article in the New York Times that says that, the Texas Supreme Court went ahead and told the citizens of Texas they're going to go ahead and open up the court system. And so, of course, the general services courts will be open back up again. Municipal courts will be open again. Superior courts will be open again. Evictions. If you've not had an opportunity to earn a living the last 2.5, nearly 3 months, and the governments have said, look, we're going to not evict anybody. Now that you're opening this thing, and I'm still not working, there's a propensity, Rodney, right, to have millions of people on the streets. And
no question about it. It's going to be a crisis. There was a ban that was placed on evictions in New York City. And then there was a protest against the governor by the landlords because they were saying, we still got mortgages to pay. So, it's all connected. It's interconnected. And so there's no question in my mind that the government is going to have to step back in for another round of legislation. The House has already passed legislation. The Senate has said that they will not consider that legislation, which dealt with a number of issues, including rent relief. What's going to ultimately end up happening is that landlords are going to have to be compensated in some type of way for a period of time, and people are going to have to be given some type of rent voucher or some type of way to compensate for not being able to pay their rent. But you cannot have people put out on the street in large numbers during the middle of a pandemic. That's just going to be unacceptable from a public health standpoint. And so I believe the government is going to have to step in at some point, although they haven't done so up to this point.
And I think that this HEROES Act that's like you said was passed out of the House, the Senate has got to at some point understand that exactly what you just said, in the middle of a pandemic that's not been solved yet by either a cure or some type of vaccine. It's not been solved. And now all of a sudden there's a threat of millions of people and families being on streets.
No question about it, DC. It's going to be a tough situation. Yeah. And there's no way that the government can allow this to happen without intervening, despite the fact that Senator McConnell seems to think so.
Oh, wow. Speaking of Senate races, senators, we'll call him a senator. Mitch McConnell is a very strange character, but he's another whole show we need to do at some point. You've got a couple of hot races in Georgia. And as a matter of fact, Georgia now, for the first time in a lot of years, is looked at as possibly a swing state. And most of us know that Georgia's a red state like Alabama, like Tennessee, like Mississippi. Even I think SB in Mississippi, if things were to work out right, you're looking at 37% of the population of the state of Mississippi, 42% of the population of the state of Mississippi is African American. You can elect someone statewide. You can elect someone to the House. You can elect someone to the Senate, but you gotta be together. But now, Let's talk a little bit about Georgia and how the Dems are doing and how the Republicans are. Kelly Loeffler, she just dodged a major bullet with the DOJ, saying that they were not going to pursue, I guess, basically insider trading because of the stock she sold. But that doesn't mean that the SEC is going to back off, though, right?
Yeah, I hope the SEC looks into it a little bit more carefully than the Justice Department did. I thought it was interesting that they took a very strong action against the one Republican senator that seems to be willing to buck the president, but with Loeffler, they've sort of taken hands off. So I believe that, given the track record of this Justice Department, you have to look at it with a jaundiced eye at any decision that they make. And I can't prove that they made a unfair decision in that case. I haven't seen the evidence, but I think it needs to be looked at very carefully. And I will be looking at all the reporting on that, because I find it very curious that the one senator that the president had problems with gets an FBI raid and has to step down from his committee chairmanship, whereas the another senator that he is concerned about is all of a sudden given a free pass, so to speak, by the Justice Department.
Well, now let's stay on the Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins race. They're two strong Republicans. She is what I would consider to be one of the business elite, or somewhere in that moderate wing. She wants to play conservative, but I think she's more of a moderate. Then, of course, you got Collins, who represents who's a congressman out of Georgia, and he is considered a conservative. I understand the polling numbers looks like he is well ahead of her in terms of being the Republican nominee.
Well, we have a primary we have a race. This is a race to fill a vacant seat.
Yeah.
And in Georgia, the way Georgia law works, you have what they call a jungle primary. You basically have, you actually don't have a primary. You have an election, and if anybody gets 51%, they are the senator. But because there are multiple candidates in the race, it's highly unlikely anybody will get 51%. And so there will probably be a runoff. And then the question becomes, who's going to be in the runoff and which one of the Republicans will make the runoff. Almost guaranteed that one of the Democrats is going to make the runoff. Because in my opinion, I just think that Reverend Warnock's campaign has too much momentum for him not to get in the runoff. Although there's another Democrat that's also running, a former U.S. attorney named Ed Tarver. And I think there might be another Democrat in the race, but I'm pretty confident that Warnock's campaign has a lot of momentum. And then, it's possible that it could be Collins, and it's possible that it could be Loeffler.
Wow. Now there's another race on the other side. You got Ossoff, who's run before for Congress and didn't win. Now he's taking on, I think it's Purdue, right?
Well, there's a primary in that side.
Yes.
That's for a full term.
Yes.
Purdue is coming up at the end of his first term, first 6-year term, and that's going to be. We have actually a couple of strong candidates in that race.
Oh, wow.
There is a woman by the name of Teresa Tomlinson, who is a former mayor of Columbus, Georgia. She's been endorsed by Andrew Young, by Martin Luther King III, and then you got Ossoff, who's been endorsed by John Lewis. So it's no guarantee, how the black vote is going to split on this. Tomlinson has a lot of support outside the metro area, but interestingly enough, she's actually from the Atlanta metropolitan area originally. So she has some support inside the metropolitan area. Ossoff has a lot of support among the progressive wing of the party, and he had a good run for Congress that it looked like he might be able to knock off a Republican, but he wasn't able to pull it off, but he got a lot of national attention. And so I haven't looked at the polling carefully enough to tell you who's going to emerge from the Democratic primary. I will say that whoever emerges from the Democratic primary has a shot at knocking off Purdue.
I like those numbers. Well, now that's summing up Georgia. And again, swing state. I've never heard that before in my life. Georgia being solidly red, but it sounds like there's an opportunity for possibly at least one Democrat to represent the fine state of Georgia. And then hopefully at some point, your governor, Brian Kemp, Lord help him, this guy down here he's amazing in what he's done in terms of, I think that's anti-Georgia, but that's another show as well too, Rodney.
Right.
Let's get into something that I think that's on everybody's mind right now. And that's the young man who lost his life, George Floyd. I think most of us, and I had an opportunity to see the video, and then someone shared with me that there was another angle where there was two other officers, and I was wondering why 4 officers were killed or were fired. But apparently, now I don't know this for sure because I didn't see that particular video, either that photo, but apparently 2 other officers were on the other side holding the man's legs down. Now, that's what I heard, and I don't know that to be true, and I don't want to cast any aspersions, but I did see the Asian officer standing there and who was ambivalent to the cries of the public and this young man on the ground. And, of course, I saw the officer with his knee in his neck. You know, how many more of these will it take for any U.S. attorney to come to law enforcement, to go to the National Police Association, to go to the major chiefs of police and say, look, we've got to be the first ones to become the ones who rid ourselves of the bad apples. If we don't, the public does not believe in us anymore. I've seen a lot of whites get damn mad about this, Rodney. What happens, man?
Yeah, well, I think we're dealing with an issue of policy here. And, we've seen this for a long time. Yeah. There are cases going back, many, many years. Adam Clayton Powell first got his start protesting police brutality in Harlem back in the 1930s. I can recall growing up in Memphis and leading a demonstration. We led a walkout from Northside High School when Elton Hayes was beaten to death by the Memphis Police Department when I was in high school. In Atlanta, when we were killing so many Black people, the police department was killing so many Black people just before Maynard Jackson was elected. That was a big impetus for him winning the race as the first African-American elected since Reconstruction. And so these issues continue to come up because in a lot of ways, many law enforcement officers don't view African Americans as fully human, and they treat us as if we're not human. And so therefore, we have to demand that policy be changed so that they will be punished. And they operate with a great deal of impunity, even when you have situations where the law is clearly on the side of the victim. Police officers oftentimes get acquitted in those situations. And we've seen that time and time again. And so this has got to stop. And the way to stop it is to adopt a number of public policy positions that have already been flushed out. Toward the end of the Obama administration, after a number of meetings with Black Lives Matter activists and a number of other individuals, they came out with a set of reports and a set of policy responses. Police departments were brought under consent decrees, if you recall, in Baltimore after the Freddie Gray situation. There was legislation that was proposed in Congress. There were changes in terms of the rules in the Justice Department. And what happened under this administration was that all of that was shelved. If you recall, one of the first things they did was summarily release police departments that had already been judged to be discriminatory from their consent decrees. And so if you're not holding the departments accountable, if you're not holding the officers accountable, then they feel that they can murder and kill us with impunity. And let me just say, this is something that strikes, very close to the heart for me. Like I said, I was involved in protests against Elton Hayes' murder in the 1970s. In the early 1980s, when I was in law school at the University of Memphis, my cousin was murdered by the police in Signal Hill, California. And his name was Ronnie Settles. It became a huge case. Johnny Cochran took the case. Johnny Cochran, ultimately, that's really the case that made Johnny Cochran famous, was the Ronnie Settles case. And I actually came to Memphis, flew from Atlanta to Memphis, happened to be on the same plane with Dale Cochran, Johnny's wife. And Johnny came in from Los Angeles, and they dedicated the conference room at the Cochran firm in Memphis in honor of my cousin, Ronnie Suttles. So my family has personally been touched by this. And, I'd like to make one other point, and I think is really critical, DC, if you've got a moment. There are a lot of people that say you see murders that happen, and they call it black on black crime. And they say, what's the difference between those murders and a police murder? Well, I can tell you, I had a cousin, former, he was an AME pastor in Chattanooga, Tennessee, from Memphis, who was murdered in Chattanooga. And I'm going to tell you, it hurt to lose my cousin. But the people who murdered him immediately were captured, they were put in jail, they were tried, they were convicted, they went to prison. The people that killed Ronnie Suttles never were even identified, were never tried, were never convicted. And I guarantee you, the way you feel about law enforcement taking the life of your loved one and never being punished is much different from the way you feel when someone is killed and you know that justice has been done.
We'll end it on that note. I thank you for that personal story, because I didn't know, but now we have got to come to some conclusion in our country, and it's an old saying, but all lives matter. But they matter to me, they matter to you, but they've got to matter to them too, right? And my Black life does have to matter. So Black Lives Matter. Some of these young activists out there are Sean Waddell Jr. We got a Sadiqa Reynolds, who's the president CEO of the Urban League of Louisville, who was fighting for a police law review board. And I told her, I said, we got one in Memphis, but it has no teeth. If you don't have subpoena power and you can't levy any fines or any particular punishment, you have no teeth with those law enforcement review boards, Rodney. You just don't have them.
Well, DC, I watched that interview, and you did a great job, and she did a great job. And civilian review boards have to have teeth to be effective. But the reality of it is we can change this, but we have to make a decision that we're going to take on the police unions that tend to protect people who they know are committing acts that are illegal. We've got to change the law to make it easier to identify and to convict these murderers who are operating under the color of law and under the color of being law enforcement, when they're really treating people, basically violating people's constitutional right to life. And we see this all the time. And public policy can change this. There are approaches that can be taken. Laws can be changed. You can shift burdens. There are things that can be done. But until we have the political will to change it, nothing is going to change. As long as police officers feel that they can operate with impunity, they will operate with impunity.
I like the way you said it. Until we have the will to change. And I think that's what it comes down to, Doc. Hey, Rodney Strong, thank you so much again, man, for being on the program here. We at Funky Politics, we look to you as being one of those persons out there that we can always go to. You got the economic experience, you got it all, man. You're in the one package. And to be a part of what we do here at Funky Politics, trying to get the message out, trying to get some information out to viewers and to listeners that there's an alternative to the talking heads out there. You can listen to a guy or see a guy who knows it, who's been there and who's done it and who's tried it.
Thanks so much, DC. Thanks for having me on Funky Politics again. I always appreciate it.
Funky Politics, recorded at Kudzukian Studios, directed, produced, and distributed by Kudzukian.